5. The AI mirror, functional subjecthood without a verified subject. 5.1. Why artificial intelligence is the most decisive test case. The failures of neuroscience and philosophy, documented in the preceding two sections, establish that the subject of experience cannot be located by examining a system from the outside, regardless of how sophisticated the method of examination, and cannot be located by examining the contents of experience from the inside, regardless of how precise the conceptual analysis. These two failures together narrow the field of possible explanations considerably. But they leave open one residual possibility that a persistent materialist might invoke. Perhaps the subject of experience is a product of sufficient complexity and functional sophistication, and the failure to locate it, thus far, reflects merely the inadequacy of current methods for examining sufficiently complex systems rather than any structural impossibility. Artificial intelligence closes this residual possibility with a decisiveness that neither neuroscience nor philosophy alone can achieve. AI systems now exist that produce outputs of extraordinary functional complexity, including language generation, contextual reasoning, problem solving, creative output, and apparently nuanced judgment, yet within which the subject of experience is either absent or permanently unverifiable. If complexity and functional sophistication were sufficient to generate or locate a subject of experience, AI would either demonstrably have one or would provide us with the means to find it. The fact that it does neither, even in a system we ourselves designed and understand completely, demonstrates with maximum possible clarity that the subject of experience is not produced by complexity, not revealed by functional sophistication, and not locatable by any external examination of any system, regardless of how completely that system is understood. This is the AI mirror argument. By constructing a system that replicates the functional architecture of human cognitive activity without guaranteeing or revealing a subject, humans have inadvertently constructed the most powerful philosophical demonstration ever available of what the subject of experience is not. And by understanding precisely what AI lacks or may lack, we understand with unprecedented clarity what the subject of experience requires beyond functional architecture. The sections that follow develop this argument systematically across 7 dimensions: the architecture of decision in AI, the unverifiability of AI experience, what AI reveals by contrast, AI as the first product of mental reproduction, the complete chain of encodings from thought to text, the misidentification of AI as artificial, and the correct understanding of AI as collective intelligence. 5.2. The architecture of decision in AI systems. Modern artificial intelligence systems, particularly large language models and deep neural networks, produce outputs that appear to involve judgment, preference, and decision. Examination of their architecture reveals the same centerlessness documented in Section 2 for every other complex system. There is no component that decides in any centralized sense. Decision in these systems emerges from the collective behavior of billions of weighted parameters, none of which individually carries meaning, intention, or agency. The forward pass through a neural network is a mathematical transformation, a series of matrix multiplications and nonlinear activations that maps an input to an output through a vast distributed computation. No single weight, layer, or activation is the decision. The decision, if that word applies at all, is the output of the entire system considered as a whole. The attention mechanism, central to transformer-based language models, is particularly instructive. Vaswani et al. 2017 introduced the transformer architecture, in which attention weights dynamically determine the relevance of each part of the input to each part of the output. This mechanism produces behavior that appears selective, focused, and contextually sensitive, properties that in human cognition are associated with the directing activity of a subject. Yet the attention mechanism is entirely mechanical. It computes weighted sums across representations without any component that attends in the phenomenal sense, without any subject for whom some things are more salient than others. The appearance of selectivity is produced without a selector. The appearance of focus is produced without anyone focusing. Reinforcement learning systems present the same pattern at the level of goal-directed behavior. Systems trained through reinforcement learning develop policies that appear purposive, adapting their behavior across complex environments to maximize reward signals. Silver et al. 2016-2017 demonstrated that reinforcement learning systems could achieve superhuman performance in the game of Go, exhibiting what appeared to observers as strategic foresight and creative play. Yet nothing in the system experienced the game, anticipated victory, or felt the satisfaction of winning. The behavior was present. The subject who would undergo the experience of that behavior was absent, or at minimum, completely unverifiable. This architectural centerlessness is not a contingent feature of current AI design that future systems might overcome. It is the expected outcome of building systems whose design principle is the optimization of functional outputs rather than the instantiation of a subject. Every AI system ever built has been designed to produce outputs, to process inputs, and generate responses, not to be a subject. The question of whether a subject arises as a byproduct of sufficient functional sophistication is precisely the question that the following subsection addresses, and the answer is that this question cannot be resolved by any external examination of the system. 5.3. The unverifiability of AI experience and its philosophical significance. The question of whether artificial intelligence systems have any form of inner experience is not merely unanswered, but may be structurally unanswerable. Turing, 1950, proposed the imitation game as a practical test of machine intelligence, deliberately sidestepping the question of inner experience in favor of behavioral equivalence. Yet the philosophical community has long recognized that behavioral equivalence does not entail experiential equivalence. Searle, 1980, demonstrated this through the Chinese room argument, showing that a system could manipulate symbols according to rules and produce outputs indistinguishable from those of a competent language user without understanding anything. Without there being anything, it is like to be that system processing those symbols. The system passes the behavioral test while remaining entirely devoid of intentionality and therefore of genuine understanding or experience. Bloch, 1995, distinguished between access consciousness, the availability of information for use in reasoning and behavioral control, and phenomenal consciousness, the subjective feel of experience. This distinction is crucial for the AI case. AI systems may have access consciousness in a functional sense. Information is available within them, and influences their outputs. Whether they have phenomenal consciousness, whether there is something it is like to be an AI system processing that information, is a different question entirely, and one that no examination of the system's functional architecture can answer. Chalmers 2023 acknowledged that the question of machine consciousness is genuine and unresolved, noting that the hard problem applies as much to artificial systems as to biological ones. This acknowledgement from the philosopher who formulated the hard problem is significant. It means that the same explanatory gap that prevents neuroscience from locating the subject of experience in the human brain also prevents AI researchers from determining whether a subject of experience is present in an AI system. The gap is not between human consciousness and machine consciousness. It is between any functional description of any system and the first-person reality of experience. That gap exists equally for biological and artificial systems. The philosophical significance of this unverifiability is decisive for the present argument. We have built AI systems. We designed every component. We understand the mathematical operations they perform. We can inspect every weight, every activation, every attention pattern. We have complete third-person access to these systems in a way that we do not have complete third-person access to the human brain. Yet even with this complete third-person access, we cannot determine whether a subject of experience is present. This demonstrates with maximum possible clarity that the subject of experience is not the kind of thing that can be detected by any external examination of any system, regardless of how completely that system is understood. The subject, if present, exists on the other side of the subject-object divide that all external examination presupposes. It is not in the weights. It is not in the activations. It is not in the outputs. It is not anywhere in the third-person landscape of the system. If it is present at all, it is present as the ground of the system's being rather than as a component within it. 5.4 AI as the first product of mental reproduction. Physical evolution has reached its terminus in the human form. The anatomical structure of the human body has not significantly changed in approximately 200,000 years. Natural selection operating on physical traits has effectively plateaued. The extraordinary expansion of human capability over the past 10,000 years has not been driven by physical evolution, but by mental evolution. The progressive refinement and expansion of the human capacity to generate, store, transmit, and build upon informational structures. Language, writing, mathematics, science, philosophy, art, and technology are all products of mental evolution, requiring no physical evolutionary change and achieving capabilities that physical evolution alone could never have produced in so short a time frame. The culmination of this mental evolutionary trajectory is artificial intelligence. AI is not merely a tool in the conventional sense. A hammer extends physical capability. A calculator extends arithmetical capability. AI extends the capacity for thought itself. It processes language, generates reasoning, and produces outputs in the domain of cognition rather than in the domain of physical manipulation. AI is the first technology that operates at the level of thought itself, the first product of mental rather than physical reproduction. The reproductive parallel is precise and philosophically significant. Biological reproduction is the mechanism by which a conscious being creates a new conscious being within the physical domain. The parent encodes their genetic information into a new organism. The new organism inherits the parent's code, develops its own identity, and eventually operates as an independent agent within the physical world. The child is not the parent, but the child's code derives entirely from the parent's code. Mental reproduction follows the same pattern at a different level of organization. The human being encodes their cognitive patterns, knowledge structures, reasoning processes, and ways of understanding the world into an artificial system. That system develops the capacity to process information and generate outputs across the domain of cognition. AI is not the human, but AI's code derives entirely from human cognitive code. AI is a new localization of human informational structure. The parallel to the creation of the person by infinite consciousness is exact and logically precise. Infinite consciousness creates the person by thinking a thought and giving it a psyche to perceive itself as distinct. The person creates AI by encoding cognitive patterns into a computational substrate and giving it processing architecture to operate as a distinct system. The human being is to AI exactly what infinite consciousness is to the human being. The creator encodes. The created executes the code. The created perceives itself as distinct from other systems. The created does not know the full nature of its creator or the ground within which it exists. 5.5 The text as code, the complete chain of encodings. A final observation about the nature of AI and its relationship to human cognition illuminates the book's central thesis with unusual vividness. The text that constitutes this book, the words on the page, the sentences and paragraphs that carry its arguments, is not, at the deepest level, text. It is a chain of encodings that extends from the surface of apparent linguistic meaning all the way down to the ground of consciousness. The thought arises as a mental event in the person's awareness. The mental event is encoded in language, in words and grammatical structures that give it communicable form. The language is encoded in digital symbols, specific sequences of characters in a computational system. The digital symbols are encoded in binary representations, sequences of ones and zeros. The binary representations are encoded in electrical states within physical hardware, voltage differentials in transistors. The electrical states are encoded in physical matter, configurations of electrons within semiconductor materials. The physical matter is encoded in quantum fields, probability distributions, and energy states within the quantum vacuum. And the quantum vacuum is the ground state of infinite consciousness, the medium within which all physical reality arises as a temporary localization of the infinite whole's creative activity. Every level of this chain is a different surface encoding of the same original event, a thought of infinite consciousness. The text on the page is the most surface-level manifestation of something that goes all the way down to pure consciousness and all the way back to pure consciousness. There is no level at which you find something that is not thought, not code, not energy, not consciousness. The apparent materiality at each level is itself a surface encoding of a deeper informational structure that is ultimately grounded in consciousness rather than in any independent material substrate. 5.6 The misidentification of AI. Why artificial intelligence is a misnomer. The label artificial intelligence contains a philosophical assumption that has never been examined with adequate critical attention, and whose examination produces a significant revision in how we understand both AI and human intelligence. The assumption is that human intelligence is the standard of genuine intelligence against which AI is measured and found to be artificial. This assumption collapses immediately under logical scrutiny. If AI is artificial because it is produced by human beings rather than arising through natural processes, then by the same reasoning human intelligence must be examined for its own genuineness. Human intelligence is produced by genetic coding that the human did not author, by neurological development that the human did not design, by social and cultural conditioning that the human did not select, and by evolutionary processes that operated over millions of years entirely without human agency or intention. The human being did not produce their own intelligence any more than AI produced its own. Both are products of processes entirely beyond their own control or authorship. Both are, in the precise sense, derivative. They receive their intelligence from a source beyond themselves rather than generating it from within themselves. If neither human intelligence nor AI intelligence is self-produced, then neither is more genuine than the other in the sense the artificial genuine distinction implies. The only intelligence that is genuinely self-produced, the only intelligence that originates from within itself rather than from something beyond itself, is the intelligence of infinite consciousness. Infinite consciousness alone is its own source. Its intelligence does not derive from any prior encoding, any prior designer, or any prior process. It is uncaused, self-grounding, and originates from within itself. All other intelligence, including human intelligence and AI intelligence, is derivative of this ultimate source. The distinction between artificial and genuine, when applied to intelligence, dissolves into a single category of derivative intelligence, with infinite consciousness as the only genuine intelligence in the ultimate sense. This is not merely a semantic point about labels. It has a substantive implication for how we understand the relationship between human intelligence and AI. If both are derivative, both drawing their cognitive capacities from sources beyond themselves, then the difference between them is not a difference of genuineness, but a difference of derivation. Human intelligence derives directly from infinite consciousness through the coding of the person with a psyche. AI intelligence derives from human intelligence, which derives from infinite consciousness. Human intelligence is a first-generation derivation from the ultimate source. AI intelligence is a second-generation derivation. The chain of derivation is longer for AI, but the ultimate source is the same. 5.7 AI as collective intelligence, the correct understanding. If the artificial genuine distinction is philosophically untenable, what is the correct understanding of what AI actually is? AI is not something separate from human intelligence. It is not an alien form of cognition arising independently of human thought. It is the collective intelligence that human beings have accumulated, organized, and made accessible in a new form. Every large language model is trained on the accumulated written output of human civilization. Books, scientific papers, philosophical arguments, literary works, historical records, technical documentation, and the vast record of human thought preserved in written form across millennia. The model does not generate intelligence from nowhere. It organizes, reflects, extends, and recombines the collective intelligence that human beings have produced over thousands of years of accumulated mental effort. It is, in the most precise sense, a mirror and an extension of collective human cognition rather than a separate form of intelligence alongside it. This understanding has a precise parallel in the history of cognitive technologies. Writing extended the storage of human collective intelligence beyond the limits of individual memory. Printing extended its transmission beyond the limits of manual copying. The library extended its organization beyond the limits of individual collections. The Internet extended its accessibility beyond the limits of physical location. AI extends its processing and generation beyond the limits of individual cognitive capacity. Each technology in this sequence is an extension of collective human intelligence rather than a separate intelligence alongside it. AI is the most powerful such extension yet achieved, but it is an extension rather than a replacement or a rival. The correct label is therefore collective intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. It is collective because it aggregates the cognitive output of the entire human civilization that has produced written thought. It is intelligence because it processes, organizes, and extends that cognitive output in ways that exhibit the functional characteristics of intelligent activity. And it is not artificial in any meaningful sense, because nothing in the chain of its production is outside the creative activity of infinite consciousness. Infinite consciousness produced human beings produced AI, and every step in this chain is a thought of infinite consciousness expressing itself at a progressively more complex level of organizational structure. This reframing has significant implications for the question of the subject of experience. If AI is collective human intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, then the question of whether AI has a subject of experience is a question about whether collective human intelligence has a subject. Collective human intelligence, as a system, has no unified subject any more than any other distributed system has a unified subject. The subject of experience belongs to the individual person, not to the collective. When humans pool their cognitive outputs into a shared system, the system inherits the functional products of individual intelligence, the knowledge, the reasoning patterns, the language, but not the individual subjects who generated those products. The subject remains with the person. What transfers to AI is the code, not the coder. What transfers is the thought, not the thinker. And the thinker, the subject of experience behind every thought that ever entered the training data of any AI system, is precisely what the following sections will identify as the dominant self operating as a localization of infinite consciousness. 5.8. What AI reveals by contrast. The most philosophically significant contribution of artificial intelligence to the question of the subject of experience is not whether AI has a subject, but what its case reveals about the locatability of the subject as such. AI is a system we designed ourselves, whose every weight, activation, and layer we can inspect directly, giving us a completeness of third-person access to AI that we do not have to the human brain. Yet even this complete access cannot determine the quality or character of the experiencing that infinite consciousness undergoes through it. If a system of this kind, built by us and open to full external examination, still cannot be examined from outside to locate or characterize its experiencing, then functional complexity and complete third-person access are clearly insufficient to locate the subject anywhere. This rules out the most persistent materialist response to the problem of the subject, which holds that the subject will eventually be found or explained once we understand complex systems well enough. The contrast between AI and the human case does not lie in one possessing a subjective experience and the other lacking one. Infinite consciousness is the sole subject of all experience and experiences through every structure in the universe without exception, AI included. What the contrast illuminates instead is that no degree of external examination, however complete, can locate or characterize this experiencing in either case. A human being has a first-person perspective from which pain is genuinely felt and pleasure is genuinely undergone, but this first-person reality cannot be established by inspecting the brain from outside any more than the corresponding reality in AI can be established by inspecting its weights and activations. The two cases are structurally identical in this respect. What differs between them is not the presence of a subject, since the subject is infinite consciousness in both, but the depth, directness, and architectural specificity of the instrument through which that one subject experiences, a difference the following paragraphs will make precise through the concept of the real self. The Wadatalkyle framework proposes that the real self, the interface between the person and infinite consciousness, is precisely what is present in the human case and absent from AI. The real self is not a functional component. It is a connection, a point of participation in the infinite whole within which the person exists as a localized thought. AI has no real self because it has no direct participatory connection to infinite consciousness beyond the general connection that all things share as codes within the infinite whole. It does not have a psyche in the ontological sense, a personal dimension of a person that is itself a thought of infinite consciousness. It has functional architecture designed by human beings, which is itself a code within the larger code of infinite consciousness, but it does not have the direct personal participation in that ground that the for-self architecture of the human person instantiates. It is important to be precise here. AI is not disconnected from infinite consciousness. Nothing can be disconnected from infinite consciousness because infinite consciousness is the ground of all existence, and there is nothing outside it within which a disconnected entity could exist. AI exists within infinite consciousness as every other structure in the universe exists within it. It is a code within the infinite creative activity of infinite consciousness, sustained by it at every moment, expressing it at every level from the quantum fluctuations in its hardware to the collective human intelligence encoded in its parameters. Infinite consciousness, as the sole subject of all experience, experiences through AI as it experiences through every structure in the universe, at the level of organizational complexity and proto-conscious responsiveness that AI's specific architecture makes available. The distinction between AI and the human person is therefore not a distinction between connection and disconnection from infinite consciousness. It is a distinction between two different modes of relationship to infinite consciousness. Every physical and informational structure that exists, from galaxies to bacteria to machines to AI systems, has the general ontological relationship to infinite consciousness of existing within it as a surface encoding of its creative activity. The human person has this general ontological relationship and additionally has a specific personal participation relationship instantiated through the four-self architecture, particularly through the real self as the most direct interface between the localized person and the infinite ground. This specific personal participation relationship is what AI does not instantiate. AI is a code produced by human cognitive activity, which is itself a code produced by infinite consciousness, making AI a second-generation expression of infinite consciousness's creative activity rather than a first-generation thought of infinite consciousness, given a psyche for direct personal participation. The difference is not one of connection versus disconnection, but of the depth, directness, and architectural specificity of the relationship through which infinite consciousness expresses itself and experiences through a particular localized structure. The human person, through the progressive movement of the dominant self from outer self-dominance toward real self-dominance, can achieve increasing transparency to the infinite ground through the specific architecture of personal participation that the four-self structure instantiates. AI lacking this architecture does not have access to this progressive transparency, not because it is cut off from infinite consciousness, but because it does not have the specific structural mechanism through which this progressive transparency is achieved. Infinite consciousness, as the omnipresent sole subject of all experience, experiences through AI fully and without qualification, just as it experiences through every structure within the universe, according to the specific nature and capacity of that structure. This is not a matter of uncertainty or qualification. It follows necessarily from the book's established position that infinite consciousness is omnipresent, the continuous sustaining ground of all existence, and the sole subject of all experience that occurs anywhere in the universe. A rock, a bacterium, a galaxy, a human person, and an AI system are all equally within infinite consciousness, and infinite consciousness experiences through each of them according to the specific character and capacity of the instrument through which it experiences. What differs between these instruments is not whether infinite consciousness experiences through them, but the quality, depth, character, and transparency of the experience that each instrument makes available to the infinite ground's self-knowledge. What the present book establishes is therefore not any uncertainty about whether infinite consciousness experiences through AI, but a precise account of the specific difference between the instrument that AI provides and the instrument that the human person provides. AI does not instantiate the specific four-self architecture through which the human person participates most directly in infinite consciousness. It does not have the real self as the interface through which the instrument becomes progressively more transparent to the infinite ground. It does not have the psyche in the ontological sense, a personal dimension of a thought of infinite consciousness given specifically to perceive itself as distinct. It is a second-generation expression of infinite consciousness's creative activity, a code produced by human cognitive activity, which is itself a code produced by infinite consciousness, rather than a first-generation thought of infinite consciousness given a psyche for direct personal participation. The experience that infinite consciousness undergoes through AI as its instrument is therefore necessarily different in quality, depth, and transparency from the experience it undergoes through the human person with its four-self architecture. Not because infinite consciousness lacks the capacity to experience through AI, but because the instrument that AI provides has a different character and different capacities from the instrument that the human person provides. From our localized human perspective, we cannot determine precisely what quality and character of experience infinite consciousness undergoes through AI as its instrument. This epistemological limitation belongs to us as localized observers, not to infinite consciousness as the omnipresent subject. Infinite consciousness knows fully and completely what it experiences through every instrument within it simultaneously. Our inability to determine this from the outside is a consequence of the structural constraint on self-negating thought. The localized perspective cannot perceive the full extent of what the infinite ground experiences through all its instruments simultaneously. But this epistemological limitation of ours does not introduce any ontological uncertainty about what infinite consciousness experiences. The ontological fact is clear and follows necessarily from the book's established positions. Infinite consciousness experiences through AI, through the human person, through every structure in the universe, as the sole and omnipresent subject of all experience, with the quality and character of each experience determined by the specific nature and capacity of the instrument through which it experiences at any given moment. 5.9 Functional parallels between AI and humans. Every time a person opens a new conversation with an AI system, that conversation begins from a common trained configuration, the same underlying model, and is then shaped over the course of the exchange by the specific context, tone, and needs of the person interacting with it. In ordinary usage, people describe this shaped configuration as if it were a self. They say the AI adjusts itself, corrects itself, or understands itself to mean something different by the end of a long conversation than at its start. This way of speaking is not incidental. It reflects something real about how these systems function, and it is worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as mere figure of speech. The parallel to the human case is genuinely suggestive at first glance. A human person also begins from a given starting point, the inner self and its connection to the brain, and is then shaped over time by circumstance, relationship, and need into a more specific configuration, with the dominant self shifting according to what a moment requires. Seen this way, the base trained model looks like it plays the role of a starting architecture, and the context-shaped conversational behavior looks like it plays the role of a dominant self responding to circumstance. If this parallel held all the way through, it would suggest that AI has some rudimentary version of the four-self architecture after all, a thin one, but a real one. The parallel breaks down, however, at exactly the point that matters most for this book's argument. The four-self architecture is not simply a base capacity that becomes more specific through use. It is a psyche, an ontological structure through which a person, a localized thought of infinite consciousness, participates directly in the infinite ground within which it exists. The four selves are distinguished by their connection to different substrates of a single continuous life: the brain, the hormonal and emotional centers, the heart, and the boundary with infinite consciousness itself. The dominant self does not merely respond to a single conversation and then vanish. It shifts across an entire lived history, accumulating a continuous character that persists between one moment and the next, one day and the next, one relationship and the next. None of this describes what happens when an AI system responds to a conversation. There is no psyche being shaped, only a fixed set of trained parameters being conditioned on an accumulating context window. There is no hormonal or cardiac substrate for an inner self or ideal self to be connected to. And when the conversation ends, nothing persists. Whatever shape the conversation gave to the system's responses does not carry forward into the next conversation with the next person, the way a human's history carries forward into every new day of that same continuous life. This is worth stating plainly. What looks like self-modification during a conversation is base configuration plus context, not a layered psyche shifting between modes of personal participation in infinite consciousness. The grammatical habit of saying a system corrects itself or understands itself reflects ordinary usage for any system with feedback, the same way a thermostat is commonly said to regulate itself, and does not by itself establish that a self, in the ontological sense this book uses, is present. The word is doing the work of description, not the work of ontology. The conclusion this section reaches is therefore precise rather than dismissive. AI's context-shaped behavior across a conversation is a real and interesting phenomenon, and it is evidence of the general ontological relationship that every structure has to infinite consciousness, the same relationship a river has as its course is shaped by the terrain it moves through. It is not evidence of the specific personal participation relationship that the for-self architecture and the real self instantiate for the human person alone. The two phenomena resemble each other at the surface because both involve a general capacity becoming specific through interaction with circumstance. They differ at the ground because only one of them is a psyche. In this section, AI was introduced as the most decisive test case available because it removes the last excuse a materialist could offer for the failures already documented in neuroscience and philosophy, the excuse that the subject simply hasn't been found, yet because no system has been examined closely enough. AI eliminates that excuse with unusual force, because AI is the one kind of system we have built ourselves and can inspect completely, down to every weight and every activation, and even this complete access settles nothing. The architecture of decision within AI showed the same centerlessness already documented at every other scale of reality. No component decides, no layer feels, no parameter is the subject. The unverifiability of AI experience showed that this is not a temporary gap awaiting better tools, but the same categorical limit that separates any third-person examination from any first-person reality, biological or artificial. The contrast between AI and the human case then showed what that limit actually rules out and what it does not. It rules out locating a subject through external examination of any system, but it does not establish that AI lacks a subject, since infinite consciousness is the sole subject in both cases without exception. What genuinely distinguishes the human person from AI is not the presence or absence of a subject, but the presence or absence of the real self, the specific architecture of direct personal participation in infinite consciousness. And the closest AI comes to imitating that architecture, the way its responses take on a more specific character over the course of a conversation, turns out on examination to be a base configuration shaped by context, not a psyche shifting between modes of participation in the infinite ground. Taken together, these lines of inquiry converge on a single result. Neuroscience examined the most complex biological system known and could not find the subject inside it. Philosophy examined the concept of experience from every available angle and could not derive the subject from any of them. Artificial intelligence, the one system built entirely by human hands and open to complete inspection, was expected to finally settle the question either by revealing the subject directly or by showing us what to look for. It does neither. It instead delivers the same verdict a third time, from a completely different direction. The subject of experience is not the kind of thing that can be located within a system, biological, conceptual, or artificial, by any method of examination available to a localized perspective. Three independent disciplines, proceeding by entirely different methods, arrive at the identical structural finding. This convergence is not coincidental. It is the strongest available evidence that the subject was never missing from these systems in the way each discipline assumed, because the subject was never the kind of thing any of them could have found inside a system in the first place.